Well, guys, we are in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 27. If you want to join us there, you can do so by grabbing a Bible or opening an electronic device. But we also want to invite you, if you are interested, to join us with the booklets that we've provided for you at the door. Once more, as we've been saying almost every week we've done this, these actually are the Bible. It's a chapter, the whole chapter of the Scriptures, and so this is all of Proverbs 27. We're doing this uniquely in the book of Proverbs simply because Proverbs is a little bit of a challenge. Because every verse can be different, and kind of following that, we just thought it might be helpful to have this so you could mark it up maybe more than you would be comfortable in your own Bible. So you could circle, highlight, draw, however that works, just so that you could follow along in what we're going to do. We'll give you some examples, but again, however you do that, that would be great. As we give you that invitation, we also want to just quickly speak to those online and say, we've provided this as a digital download for you. If you want to get this, you can go to our website, calvaryroswell.com, go to the messages, under today's message, under the notes, download that option. It'll be a PDF that you can print out or just use there on an electronic device. One way or another, we're inviting you to be there with us. Whether you're using our booklet or our Bible, we want to just invite you to be in it so that God would speak to you through His Word, that He would communicate to you what He has for this evening. So I'm going to lead us in prayer, but I'm hoping at the same moment, one more time, you would just ask. That as a child, just kind of speaking to our Heavenly Father, you just ask Him to speak to you. Maybe in the heart of Samuel, who kind of instructed by Eli, just said, speak, Lord, your servant's listening. Here I am. I just want you to just make it clear, believing that God would take even one of these proverbs and make it just special for you, that you will know that He is speaking to you. So let's ask Him for that. Father, with that very voice of Samuel that you give us in your word, we just want to come. I want to come and say, Lord, speak. Your servant's listening. In many ways, the doubt is not that you would be speaking. The doubt is that we would be listening, but here we are. Give us ears to hear, ability to hear. Cause your word to be known to us, and God, in your great faithfulness, meet us each one right where we are, so that through your word we would be spoken to, helped, strengthened, built up in what you're seeking to do in our lives. God, do that now, here, in this space, in this time gathering, here in this building, those joining online, meet us in your word. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God knows everything. I mean, literally everything. Incredible wisdom and all knowledge is His. He is what we call theologically omniscient, knowing everything. That draws us into a good space where at times where our response is to admit that He knows what we don't. I like the way Ezekiel does that in Ezekiel 37 when God is asking him, and Ezekiel just responds, "Oh Lord God, you know." It was in that passage, for some of you knowing it well, where he speaks of the dry bones and speaking of all that God had for the nation of Israel. But in many ways, as God even asks, Ezekiel's like, God, you know what you're doing. You know what you have. And admitting that is a good space. Tonight we come to the book of Proverbs and gaining into a place that God knows. He knows all things. He knows what we need. He knows you. And He is communicating to us wisdom. Wisdom that would help us live, process the life that God has for us, and how we need to kind of come with that heart. God, you know. And I want to be in that space of you speaking. That's a good place to be. In fact, as we begin Proverbs 27, verse 1, it really speaks right to that. Notice with me as it says there in verse 1, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. The command, the good thing that's being laid out to us is not to do that. Not to boast as if you understand the future, as if you know how tomorrow or the next day or next week or next month is ultimately going to go. And he just says it as a fact. He says, for here's the thing. You don't know. You don't know. You do not know what a day may bring forth. How true this is. I mean, how true this is that we could look and say, who would have thought it? I mean, I think about it. You guys are probably most aware of this. We think about where we are here in 2022. What if we could rewind, 2 years? What if you could come back and talk to yourself 2 years ago and say, hey, you have no idea what's coming. You have no idea. I mean, the world is going to change in ways you could not even have imagined it would change. And yet God knows. There's not anything he does not know. Equally as much, he knows tomorrow. He knows the next day. He knows everything. And yet there's a need for us to come into that space and admit we don't know. I like the way the book of James, when James talks about this in James 4, it says, come now. You who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell, make a profit, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. So he says, if you're that person that has it all planned out, like, okay, here's my plan. Here's my plan for the rest of 2022. Here's my 5-year plan. I got it locked out. I know exactly what we're going to do. We're going to go and do this, and this is how it's all going to play out. And he just says, but you don't know. You actually don't even know what tomorrow is going to look like. You don't know how it's going to play out. What is your life, he even reasons. It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. I mean, the brevity of our life, the shortness of it is laid out there. So James just advises us. God advises us there in James. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. It's not wrong to plan. In fact, it's even righteous to plan, good wisdom to plan, but always with that understanding that there's so much you don't know. There's so much you don't know of what God has or the future has. And so he says, hey, when you even process this, not as just a matter of vocabulary, but a matter of heart, come into a place that's like, I don't know. Here's what I'm thinking, but we'll see. We'll see what God's going to do. And James just warns us if that's not where we are. He says, but now you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. To believe that you know how tomorrow is going to hold out or where it's all going to go, it's not just wrong. It's arrogant. It's boasting. It's treating your own heart as if you're God. As if the lie that was given there in the Garden of Eden would be there, that we could understand our future, that we could know all this. He says, that is arrogance. That is arrogance. And so he's just telling us right here at the basis, when we're thinking about life, it is just good to come in and say, hey, we're not going to boast. We're not going to say we understand. There's going to be a righteous humility that should descend upon us so that even the way we process life is geared into this kind of understanding that God is God and we'll see what he has for us. It's a good space to come. It's a good space to come. In fact, it's really a good space to even realize that's a good place for us to stay. Charles Spurgeon, in a message that he gave on this passage, said it this way. He says, to know the good might lead us to presumption. If we knew what was going to happen and it was going to be good tomorrow, we might get presumptuous. If we knew the evil, it might tempt us to despair. If we actually knew what was going to go wrong, he says, if we knew either the good or the bad right now, it could go bad for us. Happy for us, he says, is that our eyes cannot penetrate the thick veil which God hangs between us and tomorrow, that we cannot see beyond the spot where we are right now. It's like we should be really glad that God hasn't given that to us, that we are in a certain sense, we are utterly ignorant as to the details of the future. We may indeed be thankful in our ignorance. And it's a good thing. It's a good space, not just to recognize that God is chastening us and telling us not to be arrogant, but part of us to go, I'm so glad I don't know. Boy, that would be overwhelming, to actually know all of that. He's inviting me to live today and to be in his space where Jesus would say, hey, don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's got enough trouble all of its own. You seek first God and his kingdom. You just worry about where you are right now and let God handle the rest of it. And it's a beautiful place to live. May it be where God finds you this evening. All right, well, leaving that, we move ahead to verse 2. Let another man praise you, and not your own mouth, a stranger, and not your own lips. So he says, there's this place where others would come in and compliment or praise. He says, let others do that, but don't let it be you. Don't let it be you that boasts about your own talents or your own abilities or your own qualifications. Don't let that kind of arrogant self-boasting be a part of your life. Let it be a stranger, but not your own lips. It doesn't mean a stranger, by the way, as if somebody who doesn't know you, because how effective would that be? It's like they don't even know who I am. The idea of the word stranger in Hebrew is just it's outside of you. So it's not who you are. There's just power in understanding this. We live in such a world that is so self-focused so often that people spend their days, telling you how great they are, whether they say it publicly or they say it on their social media, and yet God is saying, hey, don't do that. Now, there is a space for others that would come in and speak, and honestly, we are made for that. We're made to need encouragement. There's even one of the spiritual gifts is the gift of encouragement, where people would be able to come in and say, hey, good job, or, I see God working in you. And that's a good space in our life. But here it just tells us, don't let it be you. Don't let it be you that kind of tries to pour out praise on yourself, because that would become, both arrogant and selfish and just be rescued from it. In this day and age, may it not be who you and I are, that we wouldn't process our lives that way, and we wouldn't praise ourselves. Good advice, good space to rescue us even from. Verse 3, a stone is heavy and sand is weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than both of them. So he gives us just a statement of fact. So I'll use blue as kind of just a statement of fact. It's just, hey, this is what it is. Carrying around rocks, that's heavy. Carrying out sand, that's heavy. Just track it for a moment. You probably could imagine this, right? If somebody, hey, would you carry these rocks? You'd be like, that's heavy. You can just feel it, here's some bags of sand. You would say, okay, there's something just weighty. And that's the idea. Just something that's hard to bear, that's, difficult or at least challenging in that sense. He says, in the midst of that, a fool's wrath. A fool, the Bible describes a fool as one that rejects God, that says there is no God, or who would say no to God, and so lives their life as if God didn't exist, lives their life as a sense of they're in charge of everything. He says that's a fool. He says, and when you have somebody like that, and they're wrathful, they're angry, they're pouring out that, he says, when you see that, that is heavier, that's harder to carry around than rocks or sand. And it's just a pretty simple proverb that just speaks fact to this. Now, it would be great if I could look out at you guys and say, I'm so glad nobody knows anything about that. But some of you are like, I know what that feels like. I have somebody in my world that's like that, and it is true. Sometimes just carrying, their folly, carrying, what they do in that. It's a heavy space. It's something that just adds weight to life. When you need to go through this. And he just invites us to see that. It acknowledges it. If that's part of what you're facing in life, so it's like, I know that's true, but also just quickly invites us, let it not be you. Don't be the fool that is somebody else's weight. Don't be the one that's living ignorantly of God, that you kind of create weights for others that they do not need to carry, because it's not the way it's supposed to happen. Well, he kind of connects that on the next page, if you want to flip it over, as he kind of continues that thought, as we're thinking about the weight of the anger or the wrath of a fool. He says, wrath is cruel, and anger is a torrent, but who is able to stand before jealousy? So wrath, and we just thought about the wrath of a fool, and he says, okay, that's cruel. That when you see somebody and they're angry and they're just wrathful, it's as if it becomes harsh, it becomes cruel, it becomes oftentimes cruel to others. Add to it, he says, that anger, kind of like that, it's a torrent. It's like almost a raging river that would just tear through things that would happen in the midst of that. And again, just simply fact. That we'd look and say, that's true. Wrath is cruel, anger is a torrent. But now he's going to give us that contrast, and as often many of the Proverbs do, contrasting one thing with something else. So he says, okay, if we could see how cruel that is, and anger is a torrent, he says, but who could stand? Who could stand before jealousy? Who could stand before that place where people find themselves moved and consumed by just a wrong or a wrathful kind of jealousy? And he just lets us know this is so much more destructive. This is so much more destructive. That is as hard as it is to deal with somebody who's an angry person, as hard as it is to deal with somebody who's a wrathful person, somebody that gives themselves over to jealousy, it becomes harder. That's kind of an interesting thing thinking through. Obviously, we could think of all the damage it causes. For us in Christ, we could look at the cross. And we could look there, it tells us in Matthew 27, that Pilate is looking there, and he says he knew that they handed him over because of envy. That he knew that those who were delivering Jesus up to be crucified, one of the things that was motivating that was their envy or their jealousy, that they were moved by that. And Pilate's like, I know why you're doing this. I could see it. And it was true. That how bad jealousy can become, that it became that put Jesus partially on the cross. One of the things that drove him there. But it's bad for more than that. Matthew Poole, in his commentary on this, said it this way. He says, envy is worse than both of them, wrath or anger, partly because it's more unjust and more unreasonable, as it is not caused by any provocation, as wrath and anger are, but only proceeding from a malignity of mind, whereby a man is grieved for another man's happiness. He says, it's worse. I mean, when somebody's angry, at least they're angry usually over something. Like you made them angry. Like you did something and now they're frustrated with you. But he says, jealousy, you didn't do anything. Sometimes they're just jealous. They're jealous of your position. They're jealous of what you have. They're jealous of something about you. It's like, I didn't do anything that kind of created that. And so it kind of creates its own kind of weird bubble in the midst of that. He went on to say it's also partly worse because it's more secret and undiscernible. And therefore, the mischievous effects of it are hardly avoidable. Whereas wrath and anger discover themselves and so forewarn and forearm a man against the danger. At least you can know. It's like, I know this is going to make him angry. I know this is going to, it always makes him angry. It was like, man, jealousy, how do you didn't even see it coming. It's not like you can cause it. And so there's just a place of recognizing its destructive space. And again, the sad reality is that for some of you, you know this well. That you have it in your world, in your life, and you're like, it's true. It's complicated. You can't see it. You don't. And watching that whole thing play out, it's harmful. It's destructive. And once more, again, it's just good to know that that's true. Just in the midst of it being rescued from it. But if I can say it one more time, don't let it be you. Don't let this be you. Any part of it that's there that would be this place where you would say, okay, I think I'm that person that is envious or jealous or moved by those things. That is not the way that God wants us to do. I like the way James would tell us. He says, if your wisdom is based on envy and jealousy, that's not from God. That is not the kind of thing that he does. He doesn't give us that. It isn't meant to be so selfish, so self-centered. And God's wisdom will never be a part of that. It's a good place for us just to highlight it and say, hey, we don't want to go there. All right. Moving to the next one, verse 5. Open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed. So several of the Proverbs here in Proverbs 27 just kind of compare two things as if one thing is better than another. It's not that it's saying one's wrong and one's right. It's more like, okay, there's this, but this is better. So he says open rebuke, it is in this sense, it's better to have somebody who would, speak to your face and tell you to your face, something that they have wrong or they're confronting you in that sense. And we just pause and say this. That's a big part of this chapter. We're going to see a number of places here in Proverbs 27 that speak about this, but kind of both in the nature of friendship and how it works. And he says, okay, there's a space where you could be that person who confronts somebody and rebukes and says, hey, that's what you're doing is wrong, or what you're doing, it needs correction. And he says, that's a better thing. That's a better thing. And now he gives us this contrast. Than love carefully concealed. That we think about this, that love, this having this heart from it, but living it concealed. Now, this is one of those proverbs that you can just read, and it kind of sounds pretty. I don't know if that makes sense. I mean, it does to me. It's like, open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed. That's really, really cool. But I just want you to ask for a second, so what in the world is that talking about? I mean, what does that actually look like? I mean, what's he saying here that is meant to kind of wake us up? Because, honestly, for some of us, we need a little kind of waking up here that this proverb is speaking to. So, open rebuke, this place where some people can be confrontive and to be that, some of you can be more that way than others. He says that would be a far better thing to be that way than to be somebody who actually has love, but you don't actually show that. Now, that you don't actually kind of let that be demonstrated. Now, think about this not in a kind of romantic love or any one of those things. Don't kind of like go down that road. Think about this more in the idea of what Jesus calls us to love people. We think about that, just that space of where we're kind of called to, that we'd think about, what this would look like, where Jesus would say, by this all men will know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. So here's going to be the thing that makes Christianity obvious. Here's going to be the thing that, makes you stick out in the world, is you're going to love people. That's how we're supposed to be known. And into this space, this proverb speaks and says, it would be better to be someone who openly rebukes than to have that love and not let it actually be shown. So how do we say this differently? If I'm talking to you, then here's how you kind of process life. I mean, you're kind of that person that's like, man, I don't make waves. I don't chew anybody out. I'm not that person that's confrontive. I'm not that person that, gets in anybody's face. I kind of get along with everybody, kind of deal. And I'm just there. But neither do you go out of your way to show the love of Christ. Neither do you go out of your way to be loving or kind to other people. And so this proverb wants to come and say, it would be better. It would be better for you to be that person who's more, involved in people's life than to be that person who says, well, I don't actually, I love people. I just don't actually do anything about it. I don't actually ever allow anything I do to be, clearly demonstrating love. And so he's meant to just kind of wake us up, again, because we're speaking to this person. Again, maybe it's nobody in this room, but maybe it is. To someone who, again, comforts yourself and being like, I'm not that person. I am not that person. I don't like confrontation. I don't ever get in anybody's face. And God's like, it would be better if you did. It would be better if you did than to be loving and never show it. And never allow that to flow out of your life, to live some disconnected life that is not meant to be the way that we're designed. We are made to love God and love people. Now, it's in our personalities. He's not looking for you to be outside of your personality. If you're an extrovert, introvert, he's not asking you to be the other side of that, but he is saying you are not meant to be someone who shines, who shows that love within your personality and walks in it, and may God just wake us up and just say, okay, we need to be loving. We are made to do that and not to let it be something that nobody would actually be able to tell. It should be proved in our actions. All right. Keep that thought a little bit because it kind of flows into some of this. Verse 6, faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. So faithful, he says, trustworthy, good, when somebody is that friend and would be that one who would wound. Now, again, Proverbs 27 has a number of things. We've obviously covered a number of things, much like Proverbs does. It jumps around subject to subject, proverb to proverb. But one of the themes that weaves itself through Proverbs 27 is friendship, this place of what God would have for friendship and what it's supposed to look like. And so he gives this and says, hey, if you have a friend who's a good friend, then when they would be that person who would confront you, how faithful it is. I think about I think it's an old Indian proverb that simply says, a true friend always stabs you in the front. A friend is not someone who stabs you in the back and talks about you behind your back. A friend is the person who would come and say, I want to tell you to your face. I want to be the one that would be lovingly and kind enough. And he says, that's faithful. When you have somebody who would do that, who would be loving enough to tell you something, to be helpful to you. Think about it in even a silly way. I don't know if you've ever been there and you've, come to church or something like that, and then you get home and you have food right on your shirt, and you realize it's been there for the last 2 hours. And you're like, didn't anybody tell me? Couldn't somebody have come up to me and said, Jim, go to the restroom and kind of clean that up? You've got food right there. And it's and you're like, Somebody tell me the truth. Like somebody, be lovingly enough to embarrass me to tell me I need to go like clean the stuff off my shirt, And he says that's when you have someone who loves you enough to actually kind of cross some of those lines of, hey, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but yes, you're wearing your breakfast, however that works. But again, in other ways too, it's a faithful place. It's a good place that he says, hey, that's something we want. But he contrasts it. How horrible it is for the kisses of an enemy. For one who, instead of being confronting, is loving and kind and saying beautiful things to you, but it's deceitful. He says this is something absolutely the other side of it. Obviously, for us, again, we would think it through, right? We would recognize maybe the top model of what this looks like is Judas Iscariot, right? That there he is, coming to betray Jesus. And Jesus just says to him, Judas, are you betraying me with a kiss? Like of all things, here's this one who is giving Jesus up for money, who is betraying Jesus to his enemies, who's betraying Jesus to be killed so he can get money out of it, so he can get something from it. He's an enemy, and yet doing so in a way that makes himself look good, and it's a horrible thing. Someone who is more concerned about their own image and not being that way at all, and just kind of laying this out to us so that we'd say there and say, okay, yeah, we see this. And just kind of call us to say, I want to be the one that's over here. I want to be that faithful friend. And I want to be this one that is, this deceitful one. And yet God, in the midst of that, all of us are. And yet moving, just say, okay, I see it. I want to grow more like this. I want to be a true friend. All right, well, more on friendship in a moment. But he tosses in this in verse 7. A satisfied soul loathes the honeycomb. But to a hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. So a satisfied soul, this is kind of that place where you've eaten to the full. Maybe the best way to think about this is like after a Thanksgiving meal, kind of thing. Like you have eaten to like, you ate everything that and you are satisfied. Like you are so full in the midst of that. He says, if you're there, honeycomb. Somebody like offers you, something, hey, here's this. Honeycomb is kind of that sweet thing. In those days, we might say chocolate cake. Somebody offers you chocolate cake and you're like, no. Like, no. Like, I like chocolate cake, but no, I am so full. I can't eat one more thing. That satisfaction moves you away from that. But, he says, to a hungry soul, to someone who's on the other side of it, like you haven't eaten for a while and you're hungry, it's like everything tastes good. Like everything. Like it doesn't even have to be amazing. You're like, this thing is the best thing I've ever eaten because you're hungry. So it's a pretty interesting little proverb to process it through with obviously a number of layers. It's worth at least tossing out. I love that God actually does do this, by the way. Hey, it's one of those things that maybe in our culture we've lost sight of, even in just, kind of trying to be healthy or not overeating. Really, it does work that way. God has so made it that when you're full, it doesn't taste good. How good it is to kind of realize, like, you're sitting there eating a meal, it's like, it doesn't taste good any longer. Stop eating. Stop eating, because like your body just told you, hey, like you don't need to eat any longer. It's just an interesting little fascinating thing to watch how God would do that. And he says that's just the way it works because you're satisfied. You don't need anything else. You get lots of applications to this, both in protecting us. If we're satisfied, we won't be kind of looking for other things. But in some senses, I find myself just processing this through in the measure of truth. There's something where Jesus is longing for you and me to be the one that is a hungry soul. That it's an interesting way, even the way the Proverbs puts this. Though we're kind of using the idea of hunger, he tosses in the word soul so that we recognize we're not just speaking of having a hungry stomach, but that your soul is hungry, that you're longing for something. And I think about how Jesus would talk about it in the Beatitudes, where he said, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. He says, you'll be filled. He says, if you're hungry for it, you will be met. If you're hungry for it, that God would do that in our lives, and there ought to be a place where our soul is hungry. Lots of things to kind of apply on that, but how do you have your soul hungry? You don't feed it with, worldly junk food. You don't feed it on the things that don't satisfy. You don't pursue the things that keep you away from being hungry for Christ and wanting Him. Because the truth is, when you're hungry for Him, like, it's all good. See, I think about it this way, and so you'll have to just forgive me because I'm a pastor. I process it this way. I think it through this way. If you're hungry for truth, even if you get a bad message, you come to church and it's not a great message, you'll get something out of it because you're like, it was good. It was good. And I find hope in that because I kind of think, well, it's like there's hope that you guys could get something out of tonight, if you're hungry. It's like, well, Jim was kind, but it was good. I was hungry. I came into it saying, God, I need to hear from you. I'm longing for truth. And Jesus says, if you're hungry, I will meet you. You will be satisfied. You will find that. And everything, even if it's small, it would be that place of being sweet. And so process this through, and just I'll leave it there enough to say, if coming to a church service or reading your own quiet time, if you don't find even some nugget out of that, it's not really the problem of the Scripture. It's not the problem of even that. It's so often that our soul is messed up. Something's kind of got our soul where we're not hungry. And so good it is to come back to it and say, God, I don't know why. I'm just, I'm critical. I'm not getting it. I'm not understanding. God, break up the fallow ground. Kind of tear up whatever's kind of keeping me from being that one that would pursue and be hungry for truth, because that's where it's found. So good space. May God give you and I a hungry soul so that we find His truth in everything that just would feed our soul sweet. Well, you can turn the page, verse 8. And it gives us just a pretty simple proverb: like a bird that wanders from its nest, so is a man who wanders from his place. Won't spend much time on this. It's just a pretty powerful picture. You can imagine it for a second. Here's a bird, and he's not at home. And if you could watch it, you would see this bird that's kind of flitting from one branch to another and never resting, and just almost a picture of aimlessness, hopelessness that kind of would flow over this. He says it's the same way for someone that wanders out of the space they're supposed to be. Same way for that person that wanders from what God has for them. And just gives it to us as a truth. And there's so many applications for this. I'll leave it for the Holy Spirit, but just say it would include like church. Sometimes there's a place where some people, they quit. They move away from where God has them to be. And all of a sudden, they're aimless, wandering around. It can be from what God has for you. There's the service He would have for you. And all of a sudden, instead of being where you're supposed to be, you're just kind of all over the place. It can be away from the family and the life that God has for you there. And somehow, all of a sudden, it's this aimlessness. There's this wandering that is this empty, kind of pointless, going nowhere, without satisfaction. And again, He just simply calls us to say, don't let it be you. Don't let it be where you are. Don't let it be where you're wandering from what God would have for you. We're not meant to be that way. We're meant to be where God has from us, from the place that He has for us, which is why we should be praying for that. God, your will be done. I want to be in where you want me to be. I want to be where you are and what you have for my life, because ultimately, that's our place. Our place is with Him. I like the whole picture there in Exodus, where, if you guys are familiar with it, when Moses is there and God kind of offers them to go into the land without him, and God, Moses says, no, I want to be with you. I choose, to be in your presence, and just wherever that would be is where we're made to be. Well, leaving that, verse 9. Ointment and perfume delight the heart, and the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. So ointment and perfume, and the idea here is something that just smells great. He says when you have that, it just delights the heart. Now, I don't know what this is for you. I probably all of us have something. We're not talking about like fresh baked bread or anything like that. Not talking about something that makes you hungry. But something you're just like, oh, that's just sweet. I mean, whether it be, some scent, or whether it be the smell of the mountains or something, and you just like, it just smells good. And you're like, oh, it just smells good. I just like it. It just brings pleasure. It's just pleasure to me when I can smell that. He says that's the way it is. And with that, the sweetness of a man's friend. When you have that, when you have somebody who is a godly friend, it does so by hearty counsel. So, calling us again to see the value of friendship, the value of a godly friendship, specifically one that would be to your soul. So it uses the word hearty, that this sweetness that is there. The word hearty is actually the idea of soul or breath or who you are. And it has the idea, kind of like the person that would speak to your soul, like the person that comes and they speak to you, they counsel you, and it's as if, they speak your language. Like that, you have a friend that's like they know you and could speak to you. And when that's there, not only is it just good to hear it, it's just sweet. It's just a sweet space. This is one of those Proverbs. This is a really famous one, by the way. Maybe some of you even have it. You'll find it in magnets and posters all over. In fact, I on one of the pages of your booklet, because I had an extra page, I just kind of stuck a couple of them where people would just put, sweet friendship refreshes the soul. Or another one says, the heartfelt counsel of a friend is sweet as perfume and incense. And yet there is just truth there. That truth, when you can find a friend, when you have a godly friend that you can say, okay, that is what it is. When we speak, it just is sweet. It's beautiful. It's a powerful thing, something that we long to have, and in the sense that we long to be. So with that, continuing the idea of friendship, go to verse 10. Do not forsake your own friend or your father's friend, nor go to your brother's house in the day of your calamity. Better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. So we're talking about friendship. We're talking about the value of friendship, of godly friendship. And he just says, don't be one that forsakes. Don't be one who abandons your friend. When you have a friend and you are their friend, it's the kind of thing that a friend stays and sticks with and holds fast to, and is that person that will walk with people through that. He says, do that for your friend. Do it for your father's friend. Be that person who would say, hey, friendship is something to be valued and treasured and kind of pursued in the midst of that. He says not to do that. And then he gives us this picture. He says, don't go to your brother's house in the day of calamity. So he says nor, and kind of not to do that. Instead, he says, better is a neighbor nearby than a brother far away. Now let me just kind of quickly unpack what he's saying here and what he's not saying. He's not here saying that family is bad, like choose a friend over family or anything like that, because he's already spoken to this. We think about it just earlier in Proverbs where he says, a friend loves at all time, but a brother's born for adversity. And there's this, kind of blood thicker than water, like family is precious, and that's something to be valued. And how good it is when your family is also your friend. But what he's simply saying here, and it's probably not that hard to get, is that there's a value of friendship. The kind of thing that, boy, when you need help, how sad it would be that you had to hop on a plane to go find family when you could have a friend here, when you should find friends in this space, where you should find friends where you are, where you can say, hey, I have someone. I have someone I can go talk to. I have one who's a friend to me, who would be that one that would be that one in my spaces and in my difficulty, that place where we'd pursue that. And so he's just calling us to this. He's calling us to be those who value that and don't fail. Don't do our best to say, okay, I want to be that kind of friend. I want to be that kind of friend who is faithful, who is in the midst of life with people and in the midst of those things, calling you and I just to walk in that, to see what it looks like. It's a good space for us to go, good space for us to be. I'll leave that, turn the page, we'll go to verse 11. It says, my son, be wise and make my heart glad, that I may answer him who reproaches me. So kind of flipping subjects as Proverbs does, he just simply says, he's speaking almost from a father, a parent to a child. He says, be wise. He says, if you would do this, if you would be wise, you would make my heart glad. You would make my heart glad. That the measure of that would be this place where I would be able to answer him who reproaches me. I think about how it puts it in 3 John that, we have no greater joy than to know that our children walk in truth. And honestly, as a parent, for some of you, you'd know it well, that's true. The converse is often true as well. There's a great sorrow when our kids aren't doing well. But this proverb just simply holds it as a value. In fact, you could kind of think about it this way. David Guzik would kind of toss it out this way. He says, in other words, his son will either publicly disgrace the father or enable him to stand proudly before his enemies. He says he's just speaking to his son. He says, hey, if you do well, like that would give me strength to stand against anything. But if you do poorly, it's as if it's a shame and embarrassment. So he's just inviting and saying, hey, don't do that. Be the kind of child that makes your parents glad. Be the one that says, hey, that is that. Because there's value there. I mean, there is such truth here. And I find myself wanting to say it differently, but enough just simply to say, I know this. I know this looking around at some of the parents here this evening. You know exactly what this is talking about. Again, when your kids are doing well, it's like, I can handle about anything, especially if you've been through other seasons. When they're not doing well, then few things make you happy, because you just recognize the sorrow in the midst of that. And so it just speaks to that, speaks to, hey, be that one that brings joy, be that one that walks in the midst of that, be that one that brings that into this space. Well, leaving that, verse 12, a prudent man foresees evil and hides himself. The simple pass on and are punished. So he calls us to be wise, calls us to be prudent in the midst of this, and he says, hey, this place where you see something that's happening wrong and you react to that. You respond to that. The simple, which is the opposite of prudent, that's not wise in the way that you do this, they just pass on and are punished. Now, some of you might be thinking, I think we already covered that. We did. Actually, this was a repeated proverb. It was given to us in chapter 22, verse 3, where he kind of gave this to us before. So one of the things we say every now and then in Proverbs, because he does this a number of, when he repeats himself, make sure you listen. When he goes out of his way to say it twice, it's worth you hearing. And this is a good value. In fact, it's a good one for us quickly to touch on because it's a good locking back to what we saw back in verse 1, right? You remember back in verse 1 where he told us, not to boast about tomorrow because you don't know what a day will bring forth. And there's a place here that he kind of gives us a place of wisdom that kind of tucks itself in around that. Because the idea isn't the kind of thing that we're foolish about tomorrow. It's not the idea that, that kind of being spiritual is being totally like, I don't ever do anything. I don't save. I don't have insurance. It's like, no. Like you should be able to look at some of those things and think, okay, wisdom, says, hey, be prepared, see things that are upcoming, do yourself, that favor of walking away from that, even though you have no idea how it will totally play out because that lays in God's hands. But it still invites us to be prepared. Still invites us to be wary, to see things that are happening, and the simple can go right past that. The simple will just like, whoop, not even worried about that, and rush on and so often bring about their own punishment. So he gives us this value of that again kind of just comes alongside that place that we spoke of in a moment, that place of not being arrogant, but neither being foolish. Good space for us to be in the way that we navigate our lives and into the things that God has for us and would work in the midst of it. All right. Well, let's keep going. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to land. I was hoping to make it through verse 17. We're probably not going to make it that way, but let's go at least a couple more and we'll wind it down. Take the garment of him who is a surety for a stranger and hold it in pledge when he is a surety for a seductress. So again, it's a statement of fact, like, okay, so there's somebody who is giving themselves as a surety, a guarantee. It would include kind of financial guarantees, but we've talked about this a number of times in Proverbs. It had more than just co-signing a loan. Really had the idea of being somebody's, hey, like, I will totally take responsibility for them. Like, I will totally bear their responsibility. He says, that's never a good idea. It's even worse if you do it for a stranger. Like if you do it for a stranger, so if you have somebody that does that for a stranger, and then they're looking to borrow money from you or do something, he says, make sure you get take the garment, because like that's a very untrustworthy person. That's a very, bad thing to walk in the midst of it. It's even worse when it's not just for a stranger, but it's for, that person who is a seductress or someone who's, wantonly living in their sin and those spaces. And he just says it's even worse for you to do that and just calls away from that kind of space. And we've talked about it in times past, so I'm not going to spend much time on it, but it really does speak even about that codependent kind of thing that can be in the midst of lives. And by the way, this is also a repeated proverb. So we saw it back in chapter 20, verse 16. So it tells us that, not to do this before, and just says, hey, just don't do that. Don't be that person who so easily finds yourself in that space and inviting us away from it. All right, verse 14. He who blesses his friend with a loud voice rising early in the morning, it will be counted a curse to him. This is one of those funny Proverbs. I don't know about anybody else. Sometimes I like them. I just try to imagine it for a second. It says, so here you are, and you're a friend and you're going to bless somebody, but you do it loudly early in the morning. Like, hey, friend, good morning, love you. I mean, here's the thing. It's like the very nature of you doing that in the midst of it is like that you're going to mess it up. That's going to be, instead of it being a blessing, it's going to be a curse. Instead of being that one who, does good by it, it now becomes something that's just going against it. And some of you are like, can I write this one down? I'm going to write this one. This is somebody I need to give this one to right now. It's like, don't talk to me in the morning. Don't talk to me loud in the morning. I think that's what it's saying. No, but the idea in the midst of this is he's again speaking about friendship. And the idea is that a true friend blesses his or her friend at the right times and in the right ways. That truly being a friend to somebody knows this is not a good moment. They're not a morning person. I mean, maybe they are a morning person. It's like, bless me early in the morning, don't bless me at night. It's like, hey, you get to be that kind of a friend. You become that one that knows it's not just what you say, it's when and how you say it. That there's value into the midst of that, and he invites us both just to see that. Because again, he's holding out the value of a friend. He's holding out to us, and again, we'll actually get a few more that we'll come back and talk about it next week, where he's saying, hey, this is what a godly friend is like. You don't abandon people, you stick out to them, you share that openly, you love, and yet he's calling us to be this person who, is this, that does this. And I love that. And again, it's a good kind of exhortation to kind of say, hey, let us be those kinds of friends, those who are our friends, to be the ones who speak the right things and speak them at the right time. But I think I want to end, and we'll kind of close it here with saying, we have a great friend. And our very best friend is God. That he invites us into finding him as that one that is that friend. Him as that one that is the one who would speak to us, in that ultimately where we all want to come is where Abraham was even called, where he's called the friend of God. And what a beautiful space that is. And I just want to tell you this about our God. He does this. I hope you know this about the way he speaks into your life. And it's one of those almost definitive ways that God is so gentle, that he knows you. He knows who you are. He knows how you work, and he knows how your brain works. And he has a way of giving you the right thing at the right time in the right way. And it's so amazing to notice. In some ways, it's an easy contrast. We have an enemy who constantly barrages us. Satan is the master of condemnation. He pours out weights upon us. He pours out his condemnation. And one of the interesting things is it almost always happens at our worst times. Now, again, I don't know what your worst time is. Maybe some of you are like, it's morning. It's morning. It's morning. Like, don't talk to me for 2 hours. It just takes that brain that long to kind of wake up. Others of you, it's evening. It's like, no, like 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, like right now, Pastor Jim, I'm already starting to shut down. My brain's already kind of moving into sludge, and I understand that. But here's the thing. That's when the enemy pounds. That's those weak moments, whether it's a weak part of your day or a weak part of your week, you could just almost count it. It's like, if there's going to be something, a bad thought that comes into my mind, if there's going to be something that's going to be trouble, that's when it's going to happen. It's going to come at my low spaces. It's going to come in those moments, and that is so often our enemy. How good it is for us to begin recognizing that and go, okay, it's not God. He's not going to pile this on me right now. It's not the way he works. He's one who speaks gently. That it speaks about Jesus, that his voice would not be one who would be boisterous in the street, that a smoking flax, he doesn't put out, that a bent reed he doesn't break, that there's this gentleness, there's this kindness to the way that he works. And he just has this way of like, you're right there. It's like, he just gives it to me over and over. His word to me weaves into those moments when it's like, yeah, there it is. Like I could have known this is when he's going to speak, and his word is gentle and it's faithful and it's the right word at the right time. And you would find it this. You would find it to be a good thing. You would find it to be, as we saw it just a few verses back, that you would say of our God, that the sweetness of a man's friend gives delight by hearty counsel. there in verse 9, that God is that one that's like, okay, it is not only at the right time, it's beautiful, and it smells good, and it's as if it speaks into my soul. And it's long that you have heard that from him tonight. Wherever he has spoken to you, that would land into your life, and that you would find him to be that one that is so faithful. So let's close there. May it be that God has done that he has spoken, is speaking to you in a way that is gentle and kind and drawing. May he draw you to all that is. May he increase in you all that he has for you. And so trusting him with that, let's go before him right now in prayer. Got to think about it in the idea of friendship. And you are the best friend that we could ever know. A friend never forsakes. And God, you never forsake. You never leave us. You never forsake us. A friend speaks truth to us. And I thank you that you are that one that does that you speak truth into our lives. You speak hope into us. That open rebuke at times, but it's gentle, it's kind. I thank you that your words to us are that they don't come across harshly. You know how to speak the right thing at the right moment. I pray you've done that tonight. I pray you've done that gently, kindly. Cause us to turn away from the kisses of an enemy that come against us altogether wrongly. They're the wrong things, and they're always spoken at the wrong times. May us not listen to that. Instead, may we find you to be the voice we listen to. Meet us in that right now as we just thank you that you're a faithful, faithful God. Thank you for your good work in our lives. We honor you now. In Jesus' name, amen.